I was 11 years old when I counted us for the first time. Not our ages, not our names. I already knew those. I counted us the way you count something you are suddenly afraid of losing. 8 of us, standing in a line in my aunt's front room, the youngest still in arms, the oldest barely older than me. 8 children. And neither of the 2 people who were supposed to be standing behind us were there anymore. I remember the exact quality of light in that room. Gray, early autumn light, the kind that makes everything look a little further away than it actually is. I remember the smell of my aunt's kitchen drifting in from the next room, ordinary and warm, completely at odds with what all 8 of us were standing there trying to understand. That was the week my parents died. And what happened to the 8 of us afterward is something I have never fully told anyone outside my own family until tonight. My name is Ruth. I was the 3rd oldest of 8 children in an Amish community in Wisconsin. And this is the story of what happens when an Amish mother and father are gone, and a community has to decide, quickly and completely, what becomes of the children left behind. I need to tell you first how it happened, because the how shapes everything that came after. It was a diphtheria outbreak, sudden, fast-moving, the kind of illness that our community had faced before, but never quite like this. My father fell ill first, then my mother, both of them within the same difficult week. I do not want to dwell too long on the details of those days, because I think what matters more is what came after. But I will tell you this. I was old enough to understand what was happening, and too young to do anything about it. And that particular combination is one of the hardest positions a child can be placed in. They died 4 days apart. My father first. My mother, worn thin from nursing him, and then falling ill herself, 4 days later. Within the span of a single week, 8 children became orphans. I want you to understand something about what happens next in a community like ours, because it is genuinely different from what most people assume. There was no orphanage. There was no system of foster placement through any outside agency. What happened instead was something that I have come to understand, only as an adult, as one of the most remarkable things about the way our community was built. Within 3 days of my mother's funeral, the deacons and the bishop had already met with every extended family member who might take us in. This was not a cold, bureaucratic process. It was, in its own way, an outpouring of love organized with startling speed and efficiency, because in a community built on the assumption that families sometimes cannot carry their full weight alone, there existed an entire unspoken infrastructure for exactly this kind of catastrophe. But here is the part that broke my heart in a new way every single day for months afterward. 8 children could not all go to one household. No single family in our district had the room, the resources, or frankly, the ability to absorb 8 additional children overnight into their own already full homes. And so, in the space of 2 weeks, my 7 siblings and I were divided. I want you to sit with that word. Divided. My oldest brother, 16, went to my father's brother's farm 2 districts away, old enough to be useful with the work and to begin, essentially, his own path toward independent adulthood, earlier than he would have otherwise. I went to my mother's sister, 3 miles from our old home, close enough that I could sometimes see our old farmhouse from the road, now occupied by a family I did not know, going about their days in rooms that still, in my memory, belonged to us. My younger siblings were split among 3 other households. An aunt here, a family friend there, 1 small pair of twins, barely 4 years old, sent together to a childless couple 2 counties away who had, I would learn much later, prayed for children of their own for over a decade. I did not see all of my siblings together again, in one room, for nearly 3 years. I want to ask you something right now. Have you ever lost something so large that you had to lose it in pieces over time? Because losing it all at once would have been more than you could survive? That is what those years felt like. I did not simply lose my parents in one terrible week. I lost my siblings too, gradually, household by household, each departure its own smaller grief stacked on top of the first enormous one. My aunt was kind to me. I want to say that clearly because I think this story could easily become one of pure tragedy, and that would not be honest. She was patient with my grief in a way that still moves me to think about. She let me cry when I needed to cry and did not rush me toward composure the way some adults might have. She kept a small photograph of my parents on the mantel, without ever being asked to, and let me look at it whenever the missing became too large to carry silently. But I also remember, with total clarity, The particular loneliness of being a guest in a life that was not quite my own. My aunt's household had its own rhythms, its own inside jokes, its own established places at the table that I was now inserted into rather than born into. I was loved. I want to be clear about that. But loved and fully belonging are not always the same thing, especially in the first difficult years, especially for a child still learning how to carry a grief that large. The thing that saved me, more than anything else, was church Sundays. Because church rotated between different farmhouses across our district, and because my scattered siblings and I all still belonged technically to the same home district, church Sundays became the one guaranteed place where all 8 of us might, on a good week, actually be in the same room together. I lived for those Sundays in a way I do not think anyone fully understood at the time. I would count us, every single time. The same counting I had done that first terrible week in my aunt's front room. 8 of us. Still 8. Whatever else had changed. I remember one particular Sunday, maybe 8 months after the funeral, when all 8 of us ended up seated together on the same long bench purely by chance of where our various new families happened to sit that week. I do not think any adult orchestrated it. It simply happened. And I remember the strange, quiet joy of that ordinary hour of preaching, sandwiched between my siblings on a hard wooden bench, none of us saying a word to each other, all of us simply existing, briefly, as the family we used to be before the world rearranged us. By the time I was 14, most of us had settled into our new households in a way that felt less like temporary arrangement and more like actual belonging. The twins, now 7, called their new parents Mama and Papa without any confusion or hesitation, and I remember feeling a complicated mixture of relief and grief watching that happen. Relief that they were loved so completely, grief for the version of them that still, somewhere, remembered a different mother's voice. I am 51 years old now. All 7 of my siblings are still alive, scattered now across 4 different states, most of us with our own large families, our own farms, our own separate lives built up around the wound of that single terrible week so long ago. We still gather when we can, and when we do, I still catch myself doing the old counting, the same reflex from my aunt's front room 50 years ago. 8 of us. Still 8, even now, even scattered across the country. Even with our parents gone longer than they were ever alive in our memory of them. I want to ask you something before I go tonight. Is there a loss in your own life that you had to survive in pieces rather than all at once? A grief that's scattered rather than resolved, that you have had to carry in fragments across years or even decades? I believe that kind of grief deserves to be named as clearly as any other kind, even though it does not always look from the outside like the dramatic grief people expect. We survived, the 8 of us. Not whole, not exactly the same, but together in the way that mattered most, held ultimately by a community that refused to let any single one of us fall through the cracks, even when it meant tearing us apart first in order to catch every single piece. This is a sensitive topic, and if anything in this story touched something personal for you tonight, a loss of your own, a grief you are still carrying, please know that support exists, and reaching out for it is never a sign of weakness. You do not have to carry a large grief alone, whether it happened recently or 50 years ago, the way I carried mine, quietly, one Sunday count at a time.